What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Guys, the first official day of training camp has finally concluded. Veterans showed up today. There was a lot of player interviews, coach interviews, and obviously Ballard's presser. So a lot to talk about in the world of the Colts. And thankfully, my friend Cody is able to actually join me today because, we had some issues with trying to get him in here at first, but we were able to get him through. And we have a lot to talk about here today, guys. So first things first, before we even get into any of this, some quick acquisitions that happened today. So the Colts signed free agent wide receiver Isaiah Ford, had about 63 catches in his time with Miami, and John Hurst, who was in the depth role for the Chargers for a few years. And we waived wide receiver Kakoa Crawford, the undrafted free agent, and defensive tackle Kavion Patton. So those were some of the initial moves that were made today in regards to the roster. But let's go ahead and hop into the rest of what the other media guys have put out today. So shout out to guys like Zach Keeper, Stephen Holden, Nate Atkins, George Bremer, guys like that always bring you the most up-to-date information about these guys and about these players. So first things first, what Zach Keefer heard from DeForest Buckner, and I'm not going to quote this entire thing because, I want to stay monetized on YouTube, but DeForest Buckner said, yeah, we crapped the bed last year, and with the crap being a different word, but basically expressing how much the team does not want what happened last season to happen again, Cody. So it's kind of nice to hear one of your defensive leaders saying that, that end to last season is still burning in the back of their heads about what happened.
Yeah, we definitely talked about it when we interviewed Kylan Granson, right? When we asked him about, man, how'd that feel, at the end of the season? And, I believe him and the entire locker room, and especially to have one of your leaders come out, and that's the first thing they say, right? So I think from that standpoint, definitely great to hear. DeForest Buckner's not happy. This team is not happy with what happened last year. They are motivated, but they're extra motivated this year because, Derek, they were one game away from the playoffs. They were one game away from potentially, making a Super Bowl run. Like, honestly, they were, because anything can happen in the playoffs. And so, for the season to end the way that it did, on the note that it did, I mean, I'm glad that it's continued to leave a sour taste in all their mouths, including DeForest Buckner, because the team needed to be better. The accountability was not there last year. So great to hear that from one of your leaders right away, that he's setting the tone for training camp. Last year will not happen again. So, yeah, I'm glad that DeForest Buckner's still as angry as ever.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know Zaire Franklin was talking with Kevin Bowen and his boys earlier today. I think a question about Wentz came up, or about how Matt Ryan's leadership is different than Wentz, because Zaire ended up answering with talking about how Carson Wentz was not very talkative and was a very introverted person as a leader. I said it before, like, that's not a bad thing because some people do, lead that way, more lead by action than rather by talking, right? But at the end of the day, when you're a quarterback, especially in the NFL, it's kind of a helpful thing to be more extroverted and to, make your presence known and heard. And it has to go both ways. So, I mean, must be a sigh of relief knowing, Matt Ryan's now bringing that kind of presence in that Carson Wentz wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, there's nothing wrong with being more of a quiet lead by example. The Colts have had a few of those guys, that turned out to be really good players. But at the end of the day, maybe it translated to not holding guys accountable, not doing the things, not saying the things that needed to be said when they needed to be said. I don't care if you're as quiet as can be. Sometimes there is a time for coming out and leading that way. And so maybe just in that way, Carson Wentz just didn't have it, and maybe that's part of the reason why, the Colts were out on him. And, there were some reports that came out recently that the Colts were desperate to get rid of him, right? They said anybody but Carson. And so maybe that was a factor into that. But that's a very interesting thing, because you just didn't know with Carson Was he more extroverted? Was he more introverted? You just didn't really know with him. So it's just interesting to hear from a player that was a captain last year to say that about another captain. I thought that's just an interesting quote altogether.
Yeah, 100%. So here's one of the big news that was basically the big talking point of today, and it involved basically Leonard the majority of the time here. So, and this was like some news that started going out to everyone. I mean, even Schefter reported about this. First news about Leonard is that he is no longer wanting to be associated by the name Darius. Now, again, obviously that's his name, but he would prefer to be addressed by his middle name, Shaquille or Shaq, for a shorter version of that. He said this was due to the fact that his family and his close people have always referred to him as Shaquille. That's always been how they've addressed him. But when he first got into the league, he basically learned from Randy Moss. He had talked with Randy Moss, and Randy said, put your head down. Don't argue with people. Don't back talk it or backtrack it. Just kind of go with the flow. So he felt that when he first got into the league, he couldn't tell anyone that he would prefer to be addressed by Shaquille rather than by Darius. So for the last 4 years, we've been addressing him as Darius, with him not really wanting to be addressed as Darius. So from here on out, Cody, we're going to have to refer to Leonard as Shaquille Leonard or Shaq Leonard if we're going to be on this podcast. Maybe we can throw the Darius in there every once in a while. Sure, that's going to probably take a little getting used to, isn't it?
Same with Okereke last year, right? Sometimes we still say Okereke, even now, and it's not like we're intentionally doing it, and it's so weird to me that there's people out there that are just like, no, I'm not going to call him that. I'm like, you can't tell the man what his first, like, how to refer to him as,
Right.
It's his own choice. And so, yeah, I mean, whatever is best for him, like, I'm more than willing to, and hopefully all Colts Nation is more than willing to call him by that, and if you don't like that, just call him the Maniac. Who cares?
Yeah, call him the Maniac. That's it.
Or
like, make it easy on everybody.
Call him D Leonard. I mean, he's fine with that too. So
yeah,
all that to say, like, whatever people prefer, like, that's fine with me, So it's just kind of ironic that the last two kind of training camp off seasons, both the Colts starting linebackers have said actually
linebackers. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
That is hilarious. But yeah, it is pretty funny to hear about that now. But yeah, that'll be a little difficult. There might be some times when I still refer to him as Darius outside of this podcast, but I think my brother still wants to in a way, but I will do my best to refer to him as Shaq Leonard on here from here on out. That sounds pretty cool though, to be honest.
Colts got a Shaq.
We got a Shaq on here, dude. Awesome. Now we talk about his surgery. He was asked about the surgery that he had in June, the back surgery that was basically the situation was, Cody, where he had 2 discs in his back that were pinching 2 different nerves in his back that was shooting pain all the way down his leg and into his ankle. So that's why the ankle pain never went away, because of that. So needless to say, says that he has had that surgery, said that he is already feeling great relief, a significant improvement so far. Said there's no timetable right now for when he's coming back. I assume that probably means we'll probably have to wait a few more weeks until we know for certain when he's coming back. But he did say that he's happy where he's at right now. So that's great to hear that he's feeling the improvement of not having that nagging pain in his ankle now as much as it was before. So that's great to hear. So, I mean, does it concern you with the fact that Darius is not ready for the start of training camp, or do you think the signs are headed in the right direction for him to be ready at some point during camp?
I mean, obviously only Darius knows that for certain. Only he knows his body 100%. But yeah, I mean, that's great to hear that he feels like he used the word significantly improved, right? So it's glad to hear that pain is no longer there. For longevity's sake, like, I'm very happy to hear that. Very happy that, he feels like he's in the right direction. He's on the right timeline. And honestly, for a player like Darius Leonard, I think if there's any player on the Colts that doesn't need training camp or doesn't need the full training camp, it's probably Darius Leonard, just because he knows what his role is on this team. He knows he's been in the league for a long time. He's been in this team for a long time. So I have confidence that he's going to be just completely fine. And I'd rather him sit out a couple weeks than, try to give it a go here tomorrow and then maybe injure it further or, re-nag some of those injuries. So I'm totally fine with where he's at in terms of that. Just wanted to say real fast, there was kind of an update on a couple of those guys that were on IR. I just want to talk about a few of those guys.
Yeah, sure.
Along with Darius I'm sorry,
Shaq
Shaq.
at this point. Yep.
See, it's already happening.
It's already happening, folks. He said it about 4 times. I didn't want to interrupt him, but
it's hard. Yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time.
It's going to take a little bit for you. Yeah, it's fine.
But anyway, Tyquan Lewis is getting close to his return. That's great. Obviously, we remember last year blew out his knee. So great to hear that he's probably going to be ready sooner rather than later. Yeah. Rodney McLeod had a knee procedure. He's getting closer. And then Mike Strawn, that's the big one, right, is, he's going to actually take a little bit more time. He might actually miss most of training camp, which is probably why the Colts signed a couple of those wide receivers as well. So those are just a couple updates here from the guys that were placed on PUP a few days ago. But yeah, all in all, man, I'm encouraged by where Darius is at. I'm encouraged where all these guys are at. And the only kind of concern I have is Strawn. And, there was no guarantee he was going to make the roster or even make an impact here on this team. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how the rest of these guys are. It really seems like, Shaquille and Lewis and McLeod are, relatively close. And it just seems like Strawn's going to be a little while. And, it's going to be tough, especially, with him wanting to try to make this roster. That probably explains why some of these wide receivers were signed today by the Indianapolis Colts, probably in preparation for that not happening. So Let's go ahead and move away from training camp for a second, just 1 second, and let's talk about the quick need at wide receiver position. So just practically half hour before we recorded this video, Julio Jones was signed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So people have been asking about Julio, and Ballard even mentioned it in his presser. There was never any intention of signing Julio Jones like that. That might have been talked about, but there was never any serious traction when it came to that. So with no surprise there when it comes to that. Did say that T.Y. Hilton is still in the mix. There is still a possibility that T.Y. Hilton could come back on this team. It really is just going to depend. And I have seen people talking about Cole Beasley over the span of today. He has still not been re-signed by anybody. A great slot receiver, that could be very interesting. But Ballard also mentioned that, again, this position is not something he is looking to necessarily jump and attack at. It's not a desperate need for him right now. So, Cody, with him saying these things, do you really think there's even a chance that the Colts go and sign a vet wide receiver at some point?
I think at some point it's still a possibility. I just think for me, it kind of eliminates the idea that the Colts were potentially going to sign somebody ahead of training camp. And that's kind of what we said all along, right, Derek, is we feel like, and based off of kind of Ballard's approach to the wide receiver position, that they wanted to see some of these young guys, right? They wanted to see how some of these young guys kind of performed, right? And so basically, I feel like depending on how these young wide receivers look might dictate how the Colts attack wide receiver, whether or not they go and sign, one of those veterans like a TY or a Cole Beasley or one of those kind of players. But right now, I think the Colts don't feel any pressure to go and get a vet. They feel fine with the group they have. But again, when the pads come on, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah, right now, I think that's kind of where they're at in terms of the wide receiver position.
Totally agree with you there. So let's now get back into a few players that are of note. So let's first start with Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is officially ready for training camp. We know that he was held out of mini camp for several different reasons, apparently, but nevertheless, they just wanted to reduce his workload. And that was kind of what he has been asked today, with Ballard and Reich and the coaches saying that they wanted to potentially limit his workload just a little bit, as in comparison to last year. And he said that he would accept getting less carries if that's how it goes. So it's nice to hear JT taking that, and just rolling with it. Glad to hear that. And said he wants the best out of everyone for Matt Ryan because Matt Ryan demands everyone's best. So again, just the Matt Ryan thing, especially with the running backs, like you hear JT and Hines calling it out about it that, Matt Ryan is demanding a lot out of these players. And it's amazing to hear him say how much respect these guys have for how Matt Ryan is conducting himself on the field with them.
Yeah, great to hear, man. Great to hear. JT, not a surprise. He is one of the most selfless players that you can find in the NFL. He's the ultimate team player. So, yeah, glad to hear that he's fully ready, 100% ready to go, and that he understands his role, but he also understands his value to this team. And if that means, he gets a few less carries than he had last year in terms of, longevity's sake, then that's fine. He's okay with that. He understands that. And that's awesome. That's great to hear that JT is not the guy that always wants the ball. Ultimately, he wants what's best for the team. So whatever his coaches ask him to do, whether it's, take a few more reps on the sideline.
Yeah, I mean,
during a
and
game,
he knows he's
that.
Still going to touch the ball right around 300 times, right? Like,
right.
You're still going to get yours, right? So, losing 50 snaps during the season really doesn't compare to still the fact that you're still getting the workload, right? So that's not a big deal. And I mentioned Hines. So a few things about Hines. Said that and speaking of him and Ryan, I mean, he said that he gets chills just listening to Matt Ryan being in the huddle and the way he conducts the offense already. Like says, when I'm in the huddle and I'm listening to him do all this, like I get chills. That's what he said. And that's crazy to hear about that. And he even went as far as to say the vets on this team are tired of losing and feels that Matt Ryan can lead them to where they want to go, to playoff wins, to a championship. Like, he openly came out and said, like, he feels like Matt Ryan is the one that is going, even if for some reason, Cody, the Colts don't do it with Matt Ryan, you got to feel like just from hearing that, how much different the mentality of the team sounds with the addition of Matt Ryan. Like, the tired of losing thing, you're hearing everybody say that now. It probably isn't all Matt Ryan, but Matt Ryan's got something to do with it because these guys keep saying it, how great this guy has been in the building already.
And think about how players and coaches and fans are feeling this offseason going into training camp compared to last offseason going into training camp. We are feeling supremely more confident in this team because, first off, Matt Ryan, what he does, like we talked about, off the field, on the field, but also the fact that he's actually out there with his guys day one, and he's going to, demand the best every single day, right? And that is something that, honestly, you never heard about Carson Wentz. You just didn't.
Yeah.
You just didn't. The vibe and the feel and what players are saying about Matt Ryan compared to what they said about Wentz last year, it's night and day, Derek. It's not even close.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, very excited to hear that these guys believe it, because we've always said this, right? This team, their problem was never talent, right? Never was talent. They were always one of the more talented teams the last couple of years of the league. Their problem was they didn't have the leadership to take them to that next level, right? They just didn't last year. They had the talent. Heck, they went and beat down the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo.
Yes.
We knew they could do that, but the thing is, they lack the things that now Matt Ryan, at least on the surface in front, every single person is saying about him. He's bringing that, So when your team is confident and your team believes that they can win, and they believe that the guy under center in the most important position in all of sports is the guy, like, that is going to go a long way for this team. And honestly, I feel like just the confidence alone will make this team a better football team. Even if they were less talented than they were last year, I believe they're a better football team now with the addition of a Matt Ryan. And you're seeing it everywhere.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. 100%. The attitude inside that building is definitely different going into training camp this year than what it was last year. Just on the first day, you can hear that.
Yeah.
And another thing about Hines says that his goal is to have a career high in catches this year, had 63 in 2020. Do you think that Hines does it this year with Matt Ryan?
Whew, it's hard to say because there's so many mouths to feed, right? Everywhere. There's so much talent around here. But you know what? Matt Ryan, and he's got a better arm than Philip Rivers did. He likes to utilize his backs. I mean, as long as he gets touches, I don't think anything's out of the question, Derek, at all. So I'm not going to go in doubt and say he can't do it, but it's going to be tough with all the mouths to feed.
Oh, yeah, it'll definitely be tough. You're right. I think that Matt Ryan's going to have more mouths to feed than what Philip Rivers originally had in 2020. But Matt Ryan plays a lot of the game the same way Philip Rivers does, and being smart and taking the play where, you can rely on Naheem Hines. He knows he can rely on Naheem Hines if something goes wrong to make that dump pass, and Hines is going to make a play. And even if it's 4 yards, whatever, you go on, you live to fight another day. I think that was something Carson Wentz just forgot a lot of times. But I think Matt Ryan understands it, like Philip Rivers did, that Hines is a weapon that you have to utilize because there's not a lot of guys that are that shifty, that are that fast, that you can rely on out of the backfield. So I totally think he will. I totally think he will. Let's go back to
Frank. To quote Frank Reich, real fast.
Okay, gotcha.
He said, "If I was a fantasy owner, I would pick up Naheem Hines."
Yeah,
so
he did.
We'll leave it
He
at
did
that.
say that. Yep, he did say that. So if the head coach is telling you that I would pick him up in fantasy, then he's going to get a lot more targets this year. So, yep, I more fuel to the fire there. So let's go back to the defense real quick. So we need to talk about Kwity Paye. So we've been talking about Kwity Paye, how there could be a resurgence, and we could see that second year jump, right, for him. And this reason right here might be more reason to add to that argument. So it was announced that Kwity Paye last season could barely see out of his left eye. So apparently, I don't remember what they said why it was that he had that issue. It was apparently a lingering issue over the whole year. But nevertheless, they stated that he went and got the issue fixed over the offseason, and he's going to be wearing contacts throughout the season. Actually showed up to practice today with the glasses on, right, to kind of help with the lighting and everything. So it's very interesting because you're talking about a guy that could barely see out of one part of your vision. And if your peripherals are messed up, especially when you're on the defensive line, that's really difficult to do that kind of job. It is insanely difficult to play the game of football at all if you can't either see in your peripherals or your vision is fogged on one side, especially if you're on the defensive line. And if you're on the right side of the defensive line and you're trying to see where the quarterback is over here, if you can't see it, then that's difficult. And Kwity Paye obviously probably had some struggles last year due to the fact that he couldn't see out of the one eye. So now says he's going to wear contacts and that the vision is much more restored now. Kind of adds more fuel to the argument there, Cody, that, Kwity Paye might be a whole heck of a lot better this year.
And what he was doing at the end of the year, despite we know he wasn't able to see out of his left eye. That's impressive, man. Mm-hmm. That's really impressive. And so, yeah, we already thought he was going to be a breakout candidate, but even now it's like, wow, what can he do with full vision? What else did he miss last year that he's not going to miss this year that he's going to notice, So I'm very excited to see how that translates. And that was kind of surprising. Like, you hear some of these things, you're like, wow, he still played through it. And I thought he played pretty well, all things considered. So yeah, very excited now to see what he does here in his second season.
Yeah, it kind of gives me a little bit of a vibe of a DeForest Buckner from last offseason. Remember when he said in 2020 he played most of the season with a bunch of broken bones in his hand and, still went out and played regardless and just wrapped that crap up and then he went out there and did it anyway, right? So now it's kind of a same situation, where he was at a severe disadvantage and now if they corrected the mistake, then Quiddy has that meter just goes up higher and higher. So
Absolutely.
one other guy here on the defense, and it was a big talk of Colts Nation for a few weeks, and that was about Kenny Moore. So Kenny Moore stated during this when they asked about him being there and talking about his contract extension, he said that he will be practicing tomorrow and throughout camp, regardless of getting a contract extension or not. Says, I just want to play football for this team, for this city. So let's go. So pretty great to hear that, Cody, that despite, him wanting to get an extension, and even though he hasn't gotten one yet, still going out and doing what he needs to do.
Absolutely. I think a lot of Colts fans were relieved to hear that Kenny will not be holding out of training camp, that he will be going. I'm glad that he feels like he has his value, but he's not going to let that dictate whether or not he's on the field, and a lot of people were saying things like Kenny's a diva, Kenny's this, Kenny's that. I'm just glad that, he's like, regardless of if I get that contract or not, I still love my team enough where I'm going to play regardless. So
yeah,
I'm very glad to hear
and
that.
that's a great way to get your extension too, is you show, hey, I want to put the pressure on you that I want an extension, but I am going to go out there and play regardless because I know what I need to do for my team. And like you said, the love for these guys definitely is high. And Ballard mentioned it in his presser as well. And this is a very interesting note here, Cody. I don't know if you ended up seeing what Ballard said, but he mentioned that, look, everyone wants more money, damn right, but it's okay. Everybody wants it, but there comes a time when you have to go out and play, and it's time to play. So obviously, I don't think Ballard meant it in a way to sound disrespectful, but it almost sounded to a point that, the Ballard's not in a hurry to give him an extension. Now, I mean, of course, I'm not in those rooms. I don't understand it, but just the sound, the way he made that sound, it definitely sounded like as if Ballard was not in a hurry to get that extension done. Nevertheless, Kenny Moore did say that, he was going to allow his agent to, make sure that he was taking care of that. So Kenny's not dealing with it anymore. So I'll let my agent talk with Ballard and the rest of the organization about trying to get that done. But for now, it's just football. So, I mean, what do you make of Ballard and those comments about his extension?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad. It seems like it's respectful. It seems like it's respectful on both sides. Like, like sometimes I think like the thing I like about Ballard is sometimes he stands his ground, right?
Oh, yeah.
I know there's been a knock on him where it's like he's too cheap. I mean, you just look at this last offseason, you realize he's not as cheap as everybody thinks he is.
Yeah, right.
But he does have a limit, right? He does have a limit,
Yeah.
and I like that. I like that he's disciplined and he's not going to go out there and he's not going to, while I do think Kenny Moore does deserve an extension at some point, he's not going to let the pressure of one player who wants a contract extension, to change everything and change his philosophy. That's just not the kind of GM he is. And, love him or hate him for his philosophy sometimes. I do respect that he sticks to his convictions. And, if Kenny goes out and he balls out, I don't feel like Ballard's going to have an issue extending him. I really don't. But for right now, I'm glad that he's holding his ground. If he feels like that's what he needs to do and letting it play out, it seems like Kenny respects that. And he's going to go out there and play. And, I feel like an extension is going to happen at some point. So
yeah,
we'll just see when. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see when. I definitely think there will be one. It's just going to be a matter of how much and when. One other thing, Ballard from Charlie Clifford here on Twitter saying Chris Ballard is beaming about Matt Ryan's start on and off the field in Indianapolis, says the number one similarity with Ryan and Phillip Rivers, because we were talking about it earlier, says Ballard sees two minds that are obsessed with every piece of the process that ultimately leads to game day. So again, you're getting that. And again, Phillip Rivers is statistically one of the greatest quarterbacks that has ever played the game of football. And for Matt Ryan to get, put into that same category, again, just being obsessed with the little details that translate to winning football games. That's what he's saying.
Yes.
So again, Ballard just can never get enough nice things to say about Matt Ryan. And I love the fact that we have a quarterback that our GM just cannot shut up about.
Nobody can shut up about Matt Ryan. I love that. I love to hear that. One thing interesting, it's kind of a nice transition to another point that we haven't discussed yet. Talking about the little details, realistically, it's been 7, 8 years since the Colts have won a home opener or won an opener to, frankly, at all. One thing that the Colts did that I thought was interesting that kind of flew under the radar a little bit. They moved their practices. Originally, their practices were at 10 a.m. They actually moved them to noon. And they said they did this in part because the team plays most of their games at 1, right? And so the goal is to help to get the team's rhythms in line with when they'll play, which I thought was really kind of a smart philosophy that I never really thought about, because, the last couple of years they've been practicing at 10, but realistically game day, that's not going to happen a whole lot. So if you're starting to practice around when game day is, it kind of gets your mind going like, okay, this is the time when we go.
Yes.
100%. So I like that, it's those little things, training. They matter.
Yeah. It's mental training.
Yep. Those things matter. And with how much the Colts have struggled at the little things sometimes, I think this was a breath of fresh air, and they're starting to do things right here that should get fans really excited. The small things that'll go under the radar, those could translate to big things, right? And unfortunately, last year we saw when the small things weren't happening, it led to a big thing, a la missing the playoffs last year. So I'm really excited about things like that. Just hearing the things that not a whole lot of people highlight, not a whole lot of people think like, oh, that's a big deal, but it is a big deal, because they all add up. Those small things add up to big things. So yeah, I just wanted to add that one in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty close to being it for the first day. Is there anything else that you think that we have missed, or do you think we covered everything?
I'm trying to just go back and make sure we didn't miss anything.
I don't think we did.
No, I think we got pretty much all of it. If there's anything else, though, that you guys, heard about that we missed, be sure to let us know in the comments.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I am beyond excited here for week number 1 of training camp. Obviously, you and I are going to be out there on Saturday for the evening practice. I think it's a joint practice with the Lions, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm really excited for that practice and to just see this team in action finally. It's going to be awesome. One thing that I forgot to mention, Chris Ballard talked about some position battles, right? That he's really looking at as like some battles. He mentioned a couple of them, like the safety position, the offensive line. One thing he didn't mention, Derek, which I thought was interesting, was the corner position. He didn't mention corner 2, and it's like we all thought that was going to be one of the biggest battles in camp. Maybe he just forgot, but I thought that was notable. Maybe Isaiah Rodgers is that guy, and they're like, okay, Isaiah, it's your job to lose,
Yep.
But I still think it's going to be a competition, but, Ballard doesn't see it that way, so I guess we'll see.
I think the only other thing I can mention when it comes to this is, this might be the most chill entrance to training camp that Reggie Wayne has ever had for Indianapolis. We've seen him come in race cars. We've seen him come in on helicopters. And now we see him coming in on a motorized scooter, like one of those ones you see in inside the Indianapolis Square the whole time. So,
yeah, that's funny.
A little different change of pace for Reggie Wayne. Thanks, Colts Twitter page, for catching that. But I think that's going to do it for this one, guys. That breaks down pretty much everything, all the sound bites and everything that we have heard from Colts training camp day 1. Be sure again to let us know your thoughts on everything we just laid out for you guys. If there's something that we missed, be sure to let us know so we can address it at another time. But again, we will continue to keep you guys updated every day on training camp news so we can break this all down. And again, we are going to be at training camp Saturday with the media, breaking it all down for you guys. So make sure you're checking us out on our socials, checking us out on YouTube. We will get videos up whenever we can. We're going to maybe doing some vlog content as well that may be something you guys would enjoy. We're going to give you guys the entire experience. So be sure to do that. Like this video, comment, guys, and subscribe if you haven't yet already. We're on the push to 12,000 subscribers. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. And as always, guys, go Colts.